We want to thank Veterans for Peace, and it's reaching out to other veterans who are having challenges with what they've seen, what they've done, because we've all been through it. It may have been the Korean War that we have right here from San Diego. We may have the Vietnam War that we have from all over, Gulf War I, Iraq, Afghanistan. And how many of you all have friends, neighbors, family members that have been in the military during any of this time? I would think every hand in here has to go up, because we all have. We all know what the costs of these wars are and how you're associated with them. And whether you're on the front lines with rifle shooting people, or you're a communication specialist that are doing the links between communication facilities in Creech to Ramstein to Afghanistan, we're all a part of it. And we do appreciate very much, Sean. You know, you're bearing your soul to us about what these costs are. We know that it wasn't just the U.S. military that was a part of the U.S. drone program. In fact, in the very beginning, the Central Intelligence Agency had its own drone program that many of us were challenging, and went out to the CIA headquarters in Washington to challenge that drone program. And it's very infrequently that we ever have a chance to hear from somebody that's been in the CIA and somebody that's actually been a part of that drone program. And we are so appreciative of Chris Aaron, who has been a part of the CIA and part of the counterterrorism office of the CIA on the drone program. And he has not spoken out publicly very much at all. So we really do appreciate, Chris, your coming here to be with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Christopher Aaron, and I spent 5 years working for the intelligence community as a whole during the mid to late 2000s, and 2 of those years was at the CIA for their drone program. I deployed twice to Afghanistan and Iraq from 2006 through 2009 in support of the drone program and some other programs in the intelligence community. Before I go any further, though, I want to say thank you to Sean, Stephen, Brandon, and Michael, because if they hadn't spoken out over the last few years, I wouldn't be here yet. So they have paved the road for this. So, in the drone program, our responsibility was to kill or capture senior Taliban and Al-Qaeda members. And we used the drones as our primary intelligence tool to do that. We worked very closely with the military and with the special operations. It's a very fuzzy line between the two. I remember very clearly one of our first successes, it was in 2006, when after following him for several months with the drones, we then dropped a 500-pound bomb on Abu al-Zakari. And I remember very clearly after we had killed him, there was this air of celebration in the agency, as if back then in late 2006, as if we were making all this progress and things were really coming together. I believe he was somewhere near second in command at that time of Al-Qaeda. And throughout my time and then in my deployment, And especially then 3 years later in my second deployment, I began to see with my own eyes that what I was being told was very far from what I was actually experiencing. So I was having these two diverse set of experiences. And I came to a conclusion, which was that we cannot change ideological radicals by dropping bombs on them. It just does not work. I began to see a real lack of foresight, both in the CIA and at the military at large, as to the consequences of a lot of the bombings that we were supporting and the Hellfire missiles that we were shooting. Just as an example, we would often target senior Taliban leaders who would be associated with these madrasas, which are these religious schools in Afghanistan. And so the leader, the teacher of a school, would have a group of 10 to 15 young boys between about 8 and 13 years old, and you could tell that they were teaching them because we would observe them with the predators, and they would be sitting out in the field. They would teach outside as if they were going for a field trip. The teacher would sit in the middle, and the boys would sit outside in a circle, and we would follow this individual for anywhere from a few hours to a few months, and then we would shoot a missile at him. And when you're really drinking the Kool-Aid, the government Kool-Aid, it's very easy to get caught up in that groupthink. But when you step away, and it was really for me, it took me after I decided to leave the intelligence community, it took me about a year to actually start to process what I had participated in and to see that we were really causing more harm than good over the long run. I mean, if you can imagine from the perspective of these young boys, they're being told, they're being taught that we are at war with the United States, we're at war with the West, and suddenly their teacher is blown up either in front of them or while they're sleeping at night, and so suddenly the prophecy has come true. So everything is true that they're being taught. And we are absolutely, as Sean said, sowing the seeds for the next round of people to hate us, the next round of terrorists, as we call them, within the intelligence community, but really the next round of people that are just living their own lives on the other side of this planet in a vastly different way than we are living, but still just people. We had a horrible joke that we called, we were playing the game Whack-A-Mole, which if you're a child from the 80s or 90s, you'll know that game from the arcade. You take this big hammer and you smash a mole down and another one comes up. And that's exactly what it was like going to work every day. How many of these people did we kill? And then the next day, oh, here's all these new targets. It was sick. These are some of the strategic errors that I observed. There were a lot of operational errors as well. The decentralization that Sean was talking about is absolutely true, and it goes so much further. The turnover amongst participants in the war, you constantly have new people coming in every few weeks to every few months, sometimes with only 24 hours continuity between people. So if there was one person who was an expert on a target, when the new person comes in, suddenly all that information is gone. Why? Because we lacked a central database. Can you imagine it? To keep all of our targets organized. So someone new comes in, and for all they know, there's a bunch of chicken running around on the ground as opposed to a bunch of children. So there was absolutely a lot of guesswork involved. Yes, of course, we killed a lot of the senior Taliban, a lot of the Al-Qaeda targets that we were going after. I'm not here to say that there are no successes to the program if you want to define those successes as killing the targets that the military and the political leaders are setting out. We do, and we have killed many of them, but we have also killed many innocent civilians. And I believe the question is that cost worth it? And I decided for myself that it wasn't worth it after a number of years, that I did not want to spend the rest of my life and look back and say that what I dedicated myself toward was to kill people on the other side of the planet who I didn't know ultimately. So again, it's like there were these two sets of experiences that I was having, what I was being told and then what I was observing. From 2006 to my second deployment in 2009, I observed more suicide attacks on the base, more mortars being shot into the base, gunfire going off at night, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and losses of control of the country, such as around Kandahar and some of the eastern provinces in Afghanistan along the border with Pakistan. And so we were making things worse, not better, and the only conclusion that I could come to was that we are essentially setting ourselves up for what we would have to call a perpetual war. This is a war with no clearly defined goal, where we continue by shooting and dropping bombs on people to sow the seeds for the next year's war. Until when? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. Most of my work was based at Langley at the CIA headquarters for the drone program, and then in the bases in Afghanistan and Iraq. But I did have a little bit of exposure to the human side of what I was participating in. Not quite as much as Sean, but for example, we would fly our airplanes into some of these outlying bases, and you observe the children. There's that theme again. You would observe the children as we would fly into these bases. They would be running alongside the plane, and they would be waving and shouting and waving scarves and things like that. And you could just see it was that same excitement about seeing an airplane that children anywhere in the world would see. And it was like they weren't yet aware that we were perhaps blowing up other people in their village. But for them, they were excited just to see the airplane. So I think this theme of perpetual war is where I've arrived at. And this is the theme that I first got from Orwell. If you reread 1984, a lot of us had to read it in high school. But if you reread 1984, he really talks about this, how governments will perpetually be fighting one another. And it doesn't so much matter who we're fighting against, but just to keep the conflict going in one direction or another. So, in closing, I know this gets pretty dark, and there's a lot of darkness in this, absolutely. But I take something from, again, going back perhaps to high school, which is when you learn in science class that darkness is merely the absence of light. And so I believe, obviously because I'm here, I believe that we do have the opportunity by exposing this policy of perpetual war, by sharing compassion with the victims, and perhaps a hint of forgiveness somewhere in there. I believe we do have a chance to shine some light through this darkness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. These are very moving statements of the kids that you've seen, the kids that, we all have great concern for around the world, and then to know that our government is killing so many of them with this particular weapon system that we're told is very precise, very precise. Nobody makes mistakes. The intelligence agencies don't make mistakes. Nothing within the system does, and then we know for a fact it does happen. And this whole issue of the morality of it all, and what happens in the military itself when you start talking about the morality of war to an institution that stands for war, who is being paid, the people in it being paid to wage war, when the politicians of the country make the decision that that's the route the country will go down. So what happens within the military when there are people who want to have some advice from people within the military, and maybe not just their military commanders, but they want to go to someone else that maybe has some other type of authority within the system? Well, within the system there are things called chaplains in the military. And what happens when you have a chaplain who says to the military, we may be doing something wrong, and counsels people on that? Well, today we have somebody that did exactly that. Reverend Creech AFB, a Unitarian Universalist minister who is a chaplain with the U.S. Army, a chaplain in Afghanistan, did exactly that. And his story of what happened is very instructive about what is happening within our own military right now. So please give a warm welcome to Creech AFB.
So I'm the minister on the panel. I'm the clergyman. Sean already quoted Jesus, so you won't hear any more of that from me. I'm a Unitarian.
A Unitarian.
But I will quote Confucius. Confucius is said to have said, "Wisdom is knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know." And I want to start with that because there's just a whole lot about this drone thing that I don't know. And I would fathom to say that we don't know either. And that's just part of the problem, the lack of what we know, lack of transparency. I am not a client of Jesslyn, but do you have a card? Because I may need that when I leave here. And I felt, both from Sean and Christopher, some of the burden that you carry, that I carry with you as people who have been part of this system. And I just, if you could just both stand up for a minute, both of you, but the number 359 I heard, the number that you put out at the end and the weight of carrying that alone, that's a lot to carry alone. And I heard what you said about diffusion of responsibility, and what I just want to invite our audience to do with me this evening is, if you feel that you share some of the responsibility with these men for the deaths that they have caused, then I invite you to stand with them, as I stand with them, that we share responsibility with you for the deaths. Our hands are dirty, and we're in this together. All right. Thank you. So I am an ordained a clergyman by profession. I serve as the called and settled minister of the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Rock Tavern in New York, in the Hudson Valley, about 15 miles north of West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. We are a peace advocate congregation, and we struggle. We haven't reconciled, we struggle with what that means. As a peace advocate congregation, one of 10 in the country in our denomination. And part of what that means for us is to hold the tension. We are committed as a congregation to support military personnel. We have cadets in the academy who are members of our congregation. But also part of what it means for us to work for peace is to advocate and to be activists, to resist. For the past 5 years, I have held ecclesiastical endorsement from the Unitarian Universalist Association to serve as a U.S. Army chaplain. I'm the son of a Vietnam veteran. I'm married 18 years. My wife is a Japanese citizen. And I honor Mitsuko this evening because she has taught me to be sensitive to those people who at times we've called our enemy. We have 5 children. I'm a parent. I'm a father. And from September 2012 until February of 2013, I took a leave of absence from my congregation. I left my children. I left my family and served as a chaplain for a signal battalion supporting the 3rd Infantry Division in southern Afghanistan. The role of the chaplain is to nurture the living, care for the wounded, and honor the dead. That is the motto of the Chaplain's Corps. And as an active duty chaplain in Afghanistan, I counseled hundreds of service members. Many of them had what we're calling this evening moral injury. If this term is new for you, it's been written about in the literature, coined by VA psychiatrists and psychologists, defined as a betrayal of what's right, especially by those in legitimate authority, defined further as perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held values or beliefs. This is a moral injury. It's been published, it's written about, I've published, I've written about it. It's real. I conducted dozens of religious services and oversaw volunteer programs for Afghan children and blood donations. I personally gave 23 units of my own platelets through the Armed Services Blood Program. Platelets are helpful in stopping traumatic bleeding. I also supported 14 dignified transfer ceremonies at Kandahar Airfield. For those of you who don't know, a dignified transfer ceremony goes something like this. As the American war dead leave the combat zone to the United States, they're carried in a flag-draped casket by soldiers across the tarmac, up the ramp of a C-17 transport plane. The soldiers render a solemn salute. The chaplain reads the name, the age, the hometown of the fallen, and shares a few words about their surviving family members. The chaplain reads a scripture and then prays. Finally, taps is played on a bugle. And the ceremony says, this life mattered. My presence at these ceremonies granted me special access to the restricted flight line, and that's where I saw my first drone. I witnessed drones, some armed with Hellfire missiles, some surveillance, take off and land in their mystery-shrouded assignments. I was troubled with questions. Who did we kill? What was their name? Where did they live? Who had loved them? And the contrast between the respectful solemnity of the ceremony I helped enact for the American war dead and the anonymity of the imagined victims of drone strikes, it was stark. It was that cognitive dissonance is the word that I hear both of you talking about. The disconnect between what we're thinking and hearing and what we're experiencing. So I wondered, what is this drone mission anyway? Who piloted them, from where? Who made the targeting decisions? Who accounted for the mishaps, the deadly so-called collateral damage? These questions haunted me then and continue to haunt me now. Well, at the base, drones were not a safe topic for inquiry. My unit had no operational connection to drone strikes. I inquired with several senior Air Force chaplains who suggested quite emphatically that it was not my business as an Army officer. I think it was that compartmentalization that we were hearing about earlier. I thought, however, that as a minister to soldiers, as a citizen of these United States, and a person of conscience, that perhaps it was my business. For about a month, I reviewed all of the publicly available information on drone strikes. I read Living Under Drones, Death, Injury, and Trauma to Civilians from U.S. Drone Practices. You can find it online. The report was co-published by Stanford and NYU. It came out the month that I arrived in Afghanistan and was available on the internet, made for sobering reading. Well, I concluded our drone strikes were harming innocent people in a manner that seemed to me both disproportionate and unnecessary. Now, this is a tentative conclusion. As I said earlier, there's much that I didn't know and I still don't know. But nevertheless, to remain silent for me and my tradition would have felt like betrayal. So I decided to openly and publicly question the morality of this kind of warfare in my role as a military chaplain charged with moral leadership to the Army. On Veterans Day in 2012, I delivered a sermon called A Veterans Day Confession for America. I confessed to broken promises with Afghan interpreters. I confessed to extrajudicial assassinations and death by remote control. I confessed to war made easy without due process. And I confessed to a national closet bursting with skeletons of innocent dead, killed by our government in the name of America. I preach this sermon because I believe that public confession is just the religious word for revealing dark secrets. We call it confession. Well, I believe that public confession is the best way, one of the best ways to examine our collective conscience, to purify our intentions, to relieve the soul distress, the moral injury that we're hearing about carried by so many of our service members and veterans, and recalibrate America's moral compass. I further believe that speaking truth to power is my prerogative as a professional religious leader and my duty under Army regulations that at the time, required chaplains to challenge moral turpitude in conflict with Army values. I say at the time because the revision of those regulations happened last year and that line was taken out. There used to be a line that charged chaplains with speaking with a prophetic voice. I loved that. I memorized it. It guided me. But that is now gone, completely omitted. Concerns me. In my sermon, I didn't hide my identity as a military chaplain. I delivered the sermon to a gathering of service members and contractors who had freely gathered one Sunday morning at Kandahar Airfield for a worship service in my tradition. It was a Unitarian Universalist service at Kandahar Airfield. I then released the text of the sermon to my denomination, and speaking only for myself, it appeared on a Unitarian Universalist church website. Well, 2 days later, after the online posting, an Army lawyer sent me a very nasty email and alerted the battalion commander to my sermon. He summoned me to his office. The conversation went something like this. "Chaplain, did you write this?" "Yes, sir." "Do you believe this?" "Well, sir, it's not really a statement of belief. It's a confession. It's meant to purify intentions and recalibrate our moral compass." That didn't go well with him. He said, "Your message," he said, "your message doesn't support the mission. And you make us look like the bad guys." Well, duh. I mean, I didn't say that. But so I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, you need to take it off the website." I wasn't going to argue with the colonel, so I said, "Roger that." And I did. Nevertheless, the commander said he had lost confidence in me and initiated an investigation. Article 15.6. In January of 2013, I was handed a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. The general reprimanded me for, quote unquote, politically inflammatory speech. Now, I still think that the Hellfire missiles fired from drones are more inflammatory than anything I ever said in my sermon. But anyway, the commander used that reprimand to release me from active duty. I was sent home from Afghanistan. And I was sent home with a referred evaluation, a do not promote evaluation that led to my discharge from active duty. In carrying out this course of action, the Army disregarded a defense my trial defense lawyer in Afghanistan made for me, a defense that was reinforced by statements from nearly 36 soldiers, including officers and other chaplains. Everybody in my congregation who had been there for the sermon wrote a letter on my behalf. Those statements included a statement from a prominent theologian in my denomination, as well as veterans and concerned citizens from across the United States who had read my post online. My lawyer said he had received a level of support unprecedented in his 17 years as an Army lawyer. The Army also disregarded without comment my fundamental defense that I had a constitutional right to religious freedom for the contents of my sermon, which even military authorities cannot censor. campaign of blacklisting has since ensued, and several assignments were denied to me. I eventually authorized a congressional inquiry, and through that, I gained a long overdue promotion and a new assignment in the Army Reserve. Ironically, before I was sent home from Afghanistan, I was handed an envelope with medals, including the war on terror, Global War on Terror medal. When I joined the Army, I didn't swear an oath to defend secret and unaccountable killing. I took an oath to defend the Constitution, a set of laws that I believe drone warfare significantly undermines. I joined the Department of Defense. Defense, not a department of preemptive, aggressive, and endless war. My faith affirms the inherent worth and dignity of all people everywhere. And I believe Americans who share this affirmation have a responsibility to advocate for a U.S. foreign policy consistent with our collective regard for human dignity. Military leadership also has a responsibility to advocate for a method of warfighting consistent with our military values, like respect, integrity, and personal courage. Halting these lethal drone strikes, following the recommendations of the Stimson Center, we're going to hear more about those in a minute, I think is a vital step to healing what we're calling moral injury, reclaiming national honor, and restoring the soul of America.